Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gripe, the show for short, sweet movie reviews of new release movies, plus the one thing that annoyed me the most. And today's episode is going to be extra special because I'm going to be talking about The Danish Girl. And this movie is one that I'll get into it a little bit more, but it's certainly going to be a little bit controversial for anybody out there who might be trans. And yeah, because I have some opinions about this movie. So, but before I get into that, start just kind of by giving you a little bit of background. If you haven't heard of The Danish Girl, it's the story of Lily Elba, who was one of the pioneers of transgender women in the Western world, basically. She was an artist in Denmark and Paris, in the early 1900s, pre-World War II, roughly, is when, she got big, who was married to another artist, and that artist, in the movie, her name is Gerta Wegener. In real life, she's known by a different name, but basically, she was kind of a struggling artist herself. And one of the ways that she sort of helped her own career was by doing what were known as the lily paintings, which was basically her husband Einar, um, dressed in feminine clothing, basically to look, female, and ultimately, create these, really feminine paintings of him. And in the movie, he transitions, basically he uses that kind of as the jumping off point to embrace, the fact that he's trans and kind of moving into that role on a permanent basis. And ultimately, what happens was, once Einar transitioned to Lily, and started living full time as female, she underwent, a basically SRS, sexual reassignment surgery, one of the first of its kind at the time. Even though the movie basically says that it was the first, was not actually the first, but for the sake of drama, let's say it was the first. But she had to go through a series of surgeries in order to create, to go through sexual reassignment. So, um, the movie itself, kind of follows her life from kind of right before she transitioned to, the period of transition, and then finally her surgeries, and ultimately leading to her death. Yes, it is a tragedy, and that, it does end, unfortunately, in her death. Um, but the story focuses also quite a bit on her wife, Gerda, and the struggles that she has with, seeing her husband transition and go through all this, and sort of the, flux of emotions that, that people go through whenever somebody comes out as trans. Um, but certainly on a, in a time before it really was, you know, before it really was understood in any degree. In the movie, there's even a few scenes where, they go to seek help from psychologists and people like that. And basically, the diagnosis from everybody is that she has a mental illness. And while today that wouldn't be true, back then it likely did have certain. There probably were quite a few doctors who that was the only diagnosis they had. The DSM wasn't as robust as it is today. But without getting into that, that's basically what the plot of the movie is. And, Tom Hooper, who directed the most recent Les Miserables, and won an Oscar for The King's Speech, which was well deserved. He brought his kind of style and flair into this movie, and it is a very beautifully done movie. I will give it credit for that. The look of it, all of that, just beautifully done. It's well acted. Eddie Redmayne plays Lily Elbe. Um, Alicia Vikander, who is just like a phenomenal actress and has just come out of nowhere, it seems, in this last year to do some really amazing things. She plays, Gerda Wegener, um, and the movie pretty much focuses on those two. Sebastian Koch, though, he comes in as the doctor who does Lily's surgery, and he's always a pleasure. He's a German actor, fantastic, actor. And there's a few other There's a character who plays basically Einar's best friend from childhood, and he has very fond memories of this man. And he's played by an actor named looking it up named Matthias Schoenhartz. I think I'm saying that right. He does a really good job as kind of this, art dealer who's trying to be friendly, who's trying to be supportive, but then also is, very guarded man, very, calm. It's he plays an interesting character, and I think he's meant to represent somebody in real life, somebody who did exist. But there's a few characters in this movie who do not actually represent real people. They're just there for the dramatic effect. Ben Whishaw, who plays Q in the James Bond movies now, also plays a role in this as a homosexual man who's attracted to Lily at first, especially when he believes that Lily is just basically a man in a dress, but then becomes kind of a support system after she starts to undergo surgery and all that stuff. So that's roughly what the movie is. It's beautifully done, well acted, a you know very dramatic movie. There's a point where I actually was crying, but there was only one point. So I'm going to jump right into my key gripes because I have a lot of them with this movie. Being trans myself, it's one of those things that when you go into a movie that, for something that doesn't have a lot of exposure, even though we're seeing a lot more trans stuff nowadays, there still isn't a lot of exposure and a lot of understanding. This movie has a few moments that it captures being trans better than anything else I've seen. And obviously that's a good thing. Obviously having those moments that to be able to kind of express these really deep emotions that trans people feel and undergo, to be able to show that is extremely tricky, and this movie does that extremely well in a few parts. There's, a couple of scenes where it really does shine. But then there's a couple of things that for people who have gone through transition, who are have lived their gender identity for years and years and have gone through experiences like that, there are like triggers that occur in this movie that are damaging. And I think part of it, and this is why it's not just me nitpicking the movie, it's actually things that I think hurt the story in general. So let's start at the very beginning. There's a scene where Gerta wants Einar to basically put on these stockings and shoes so she can finish up a painting she's doing of a ballerina. So Einar, basically drapes the dress over him, does the stockings and shoes and all that, and it's just kind of this like, oh, fanciful type of thing. And then that, when they decide that they're going to go to this art gala, she suggests, hey, Einar, why don't you, dress as Lily and come, and we'll make a game out of it. And there's this scene where they're just like running around, they're doing makeup, they're trying on wigs, and they're doing all this stuff. It's very fanciful, very free. It does kind of convey this like, freedom and all that, she wants to have. But, a trained eye is gonna see something there that most people might not, and that is what is happening there is actually called forced feminization, and that's something that is basically a subset of transvestism, cross-dressing, that is a fetishized version of cross-dressing, basically. So right here in a scene that is actually a very important moment for the movie, what they do is they fetishize her kind of initial transformation. They take her, the fact that she's, this is obviously something that Lily wants. This is something that Lily is like, craving to do. And they turn this important moment into a fetishized moment. And that doesn't work for me at all. That really does not work for me. And I'm watching it with just kind of my mouth open going, are you serious? This is really how they want to present this. Tom Hooper is a very artistic director, so I was hoping that he could take something like that and really, there are points in the movie where he put some real emotional heft. There's a scene where Lily, or I should say, Einar goes to work, and he works in a place where he's doing like painting for theater and stuff like that. He goes to work, and basically he, undresses and, kind of looks at himself naked and sort of like has this like feminine moment of like seeing the feminine side of himself. That scene hit me really hard because it's something that is actually real. That is something that trans people struggle with through. What the whole forced feminization scene, that is something that people imagine trans people do, and that's not something that trans people that's not, it should be their, it's their growth, their discovery. So to show the scene that way was extremely painful to watch. And that was just one of many choices throughout the movie where they seem to go this kind of like fantasized route of what it means to be trans instead of, you know, the the reality of, people being trans. There's and one of the other things that really bugged me in this movie was the fact that most of the story was focused on Lily's wife, Gerta. The story is focused mostly on her, which isn't a bad thing per se. But what happens is that at the beginning of the movie, she's very confident, she's very strong, and it almost seems like she knows that her husband is trans and almost is trying to like support that. But as soon as it happens, suddenly her character becomes weak, confused, just, completely like, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I don't like this. Which, for one, isn't how the real person was. Um, the real painter, and this is something they left out of the movie, probably intentionally, was that the real painter was, she was quite skilled at doing paintings, basically erotic lesbian paintings. So to kind of make her this woman who's like, no, no, I'm totally straight. Everything here is wrong. I don't like any of this. Really kind of did a disservice to the character and made her out to be the victim here. And in any movie, you have every right to turn any character into the victim, the focal point. I get that. The problem is that they turned her into the victim and sort of turned Lily into the villain in this story by making her out to be kind of self-centered and not really thinking about other people's feelings and all that, and just kind of ignoring anything other than, her own desire to express her gender and to explore that. And that doesn't work for me because that just goes to kind of the transphobia that, exists everywhere, where it's like, okay, somebody is trying to save themselves on an emotional, on a mental, on a physical level. They're trying to basically save their own lives because so many trans people don't, or they attempt to throw away their lives because of how people view them and how people kind of treat them as selfish, as, short-sighted, as all this is. Trans people are the enemies in a lot of situations, and they kind of do that here where Lily is the villain because she's affecting Gerta so strongly, where like Gerta's like, what, I just, I don't know what to do. And that doesn't work for me because all Lily's trying to do is protect herself and to become her true self and to embrace that. And instead of them, and the thing is that this is all Gerta's idea in the first place of having her, she was the one who started painting these Lily portraits. So she kind of brought this on herself, and then suddenly in the movie she no longer wants that. She like runs away from it and is terrified of it. And if the book and the movie had gone more along the lines of what really happened in real life, this wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have had the same, like, we still love each other sort of ending that this one has. It would have probably had a more realistic ending to, the fact that they really did separate, but it also would have had the ending, or it would have shown that she totally supported what Lily was, becoming in a sense. It didn't work for their marriage, but she wasn't like trying to suppress it, and she certainly wasn't blaming it for her own problems. She had a lot of struggles on her own, and, ultimately she died, penniless and used. But in the movie, they really do a disservice to Lily's character by kind of making her out to be this selfish, you know, thoughtless character, which, for a trans character, that's exceedingly difficult to, for someone like me to swallow, because then it makes them out to be the villain when all they're trying to do is become themselves. And that's the whole goal, I guess maybe my expectations for this movie were that it were a little bit more focused on her, a little bit more focused on her journey, her, what was going through her head, but instead they really just kind of made it as it's like, oh, it's very willy-nilly, very, kind of uh, almost lighthearted in a way. They didn't take very many risks in showing the real emotional impact of being trans, of going through these things, especially at a time when it was not acceptable. It was not, or even like making light of the fact that people considered her like to be mentally ill and all that. It's like, oh, haha, this whole kind of funny scene. That's it really just it didn't paint her in a very good light. And that's not to say Eddie Redmayne didn't try to do a good job. I want to say the story just did not yield itself to a very strong central trans character, and that really bothered me. I left the theater angry when I saw that movie because they really just did not do a service to this character. And I know a lot of people I know are trans people, and they talked about, they came out of the theater, they cried the whole time, everything was just sad and tearful and all that. And when I got to the end of the movie, when, she passes away, I'm like, they really, like, that was just their goal, was to, like, create this, character that, you could, kind of, just gawk at for a few hours, and then they kill her off. And the weight of her death is so small because they didn't take the time to show what it was really like for her, what it really meant for her to have to go through this transition, to go through all this, and the pain and the suffering that it really did. I mean, they showed the physical pain after surgery, but that's not the same thing. They really did not do a very good job of showing the emotional struggle that goes along with being trans. And, for, the normal audience, maybe this was enough. Maybe this was enough for them to swallow, because it is a very heavy movie. It's a very dramatic, artistic movie. But for someone like me who has, lived through this, who has experienced this, it was, I saw it as being damaging. And that made me extremely angry. So, maybe I'll see it again sometime and, reevaluate it. But, my first impression of this movie was not a good one. And it saddens me because, again, there were a few things in there that they did really well. But then there's a few things that they did in there that made her out to be this villain that she didn't deserve to be considered the villain, not when she was struggling with something so intense. So my initial rating of this movie is 6.5 out of 10. And that's mostly for, the technical aspect, the artistic aspect, how it looks, the acting, the music is beautiful. Um, all that very well done. But the movie suffers horribly from a story that just does not treat its trans character with the respect she deserves. So 6.5 out of 10. So sorry for the long one, but that's my review of The Danish Girl, and hope to see you next time on Key Gripe. Thanks.